Hello, everyone, and welcome to a presentation on urban gardens and affordable housing. I am your presenter, Jonathan Wetstein, and I am the program manager for Roots to Prevention in Camden, New Jersey. Before we dive beyond this intro, I'd like to give an overview of our agenda. I'll be discussing a little bit about Roots to Prevention. For those who haven't heard about the work that I've been invested in over in Camden, New Jersey, I'll give you an overview, as well as why affordable housing and gardens, and also how can affordable housing support local food systems? What are some of the policies that support this work, as well as funding for gardens? And we'll wrap up with a toolkit of affordable housing and gardens that has been worked on through the University of Rowan in collaboration with Roots to Prevention and several other partners. So Roots to Prevention, this is a cross-sectoral collaboration of residents and nonprofits and farmers and institutions. And we're all coming together to address upstream causes of diet-related diseases through the distribution of fresh foods vouchers. These are portable prescriptions that are issued by Virtual Health to food insecure patients. We've worked to make sure that those prescriptions can be redeemed locally at mobile farm trucks and buses that are run by Virtual Health, as well as Healthy Corner stores. So we want to make it as easy as possible for families to accept and utilize and redeem these vouchers right in their own community. We also try to provide widespread urban farm training with our intent to one day have patients who are screened for food insecurity and have a disease related to diet, who are receiving those fresh foods prescription vouchers to be able to one day grow food and sell it back into the system. That process is something we are currently piloting right now with existing growers in the city. And so our hope is that we'll continue to learn from this process to take these wellness programs and turn them into a community development program that provides access to income and healthy, fresh foods all in one. Another important component of the Roots to Prevention work right now is expanding dietary and social services. So making it accessible for families and patients beyond the doctor's office, online and in Zoom. These are just some of our partners that we currently have. Parkside Business Community Partnership is the CBO. We work with health insurers, universities like Rowan, the health department, and many others to make sure these programs are available and running. And we also work with the Camden Urban Ag Collaborative. Because of national funding that we received from the Build Health Challenge grant, we were able to leverage the dollars to test out Roots to Prevention to get USDA funds that allow us to establish 8 to 9 garden hubs, a half-a-mile walking distance from the communities that we serve, so that residents can walk there, receive soil, seedlings, tools, and other items that will help ensure that the quality of produce they're producing is great. We also make sure that there are tools and resources that are shared across that network to ensure that we can scale up our production for healthcare. So we really can see a transformative effect on the local food system. And we make sure that we have local residents that represent this food system that can, through our apprenticeship program, become leaders in a Camden-based healthy food economy. So all of these investments are to ensure that we can continue to provide our healthcare partners with quality produce that they can prescribe and sell to the community. So why affordable housing? I'd like to start with a better question. What are the key components to a successful garden? What is needed, really? And so first and foremost, you need to have access to clean, open space. So we're talking availability of necessary conditions like sun, water, clean soil. We absolutely would need growers to be able to access that space regularly. The size needs to be appropriate for the current needs, but be able to address future production burdens that might come about based on growing demand. So those are some of the key components that we need to have. Clean and open space that's accessible. Site control is an important one as well. In the past, we've worked with adopt-a-lots and shared spaces. but oftentimes those properties may be taken away for development. So we really want to make sure we have a long-term strategy to ensure that land will be set aside for food production, that the agreements really specify who's responsible, and that there is the correct and appropriate permission to grow and sell produce that can't happen on public land in Camden. So really making sure we have ownership of land that allows us to do the necessary things to ensure quality produce can be grown and perhaps sold. As mentioned in the beginning, access to people is very important, not just the elderly, but really intergenerational. To ensure that we have local leaders that are getting into the food economy, making sure that they can have a seat at the table in planning these gardens, letting us know what type of programs, resources, and gardens are we looking for? Is this for just food? Is this for production? Is this for learning? Is a little bit of both? Very important to make sure that we have the support and interest of our constituents at the neighborhood resident level. Maintenance support, having the necessary resources to do so, including the tools, the storage for the tools, backup sources of water, transparency on who's responsible for what, operations plans so we can figure out how waste and composting can be a resource, who's dealing with the groundskeeping. We don't want our paths overgrown so the access becomes compromised to the space. So there's a lot that goes into maintenance support, and there's certainly money that's needed to maintain the maintenance components of this work. There's also funding needs for capital. This is all the physical stuff. Do we need to build raised beds? Are the crops going directly into the ground? What are the tools and equipment, the soil we need to import if necessary? So all the stuff we have to buy to make these gardens up and functioning. And certainly the programming. You need a garden educator. You need someone who can not only help bring programs to the community, but also help figure out ways we can recruit our own residents to be educators, how to share some of those resources, how to really foster that local leadership, the apprentice training, and also make sure that we have time for community organizing, resident engagement, and having the correct promotional tools so people know what's going on in these spaces. This is just as important as the capital. So we started this adventure a number of years ago. Parks Had Business and Community in Partnership is a local nonprofit in Camden that has invested in what we called Roots to Market, an initiative to help residents learn how to grow and sell produce. We started with public schools because we could get that access to open space, and we could get that site control. But at the end of the day, students were gone at the height of gardening season. Schools and administrations would change, making it very difficult for even our residents to utilize that land and access it on a regular basis. So we did run into a number of stumbling blocks that made us then kind of consider, what about our faith-based partners? How could a church and a mosque also provide us the access to clean and open space and that site control? And what we learned was that the congregates were there year round. So recruitment was a little bit easier. They had a variety of programs that were tied into food access, which really complemented having a garden. But when it got to the sustained resources for things like maintenance, for programs and capital long-term, we were running into a lot of challenges on maintaining and sustaining those facilities and keeping people engaged on those spaces. And so that's when we started to pivot and look at affordable housing communities, because here we had, again, the site control wasn't going anywhere. We were working with where residents and students lived. So we had them captive essentially for the whole year, all the growing seasons. They had programs already administered that would pair well with our gardening work, but they also had someone to talk to about maintenance. They had a building facilities operation, often through philanthropic avenues from the manager or the developer. We could get more capital. So thinking of all of the key ingredients, we were finding them all lined up in affordable housing. And we kicked this adventure off in the Branch Village community in the Centerville section of Camden to really see if this would really come to fruition. And so In that process, we got to understand who are the key affordable housing actors that would be present in most communities across the state. And we start with the housing developer and this entity who's responsible for the construction of the community also onboards and appoints a property manager, a facilities manager, and usually they have some branch of philanthropic services. So some sort of foundational side. So you have a point person responsible for the grounds, the maintenance, and some additional dollars that can come into the project, even if this is an already constructed development like Branch Village was. They often have, as part of the HUD requirements, a social service provider. And so here you have your resident engagement being facilitated by this service provider. You have resident trust because of their long-term presence in the community. And you have qualitative data being collected because of this. So you can leverage the resources from the social service provider to onboard and engage residents to start to plan and get that buy-in early on the garden, and also to figure out what type of garden they would like to have there. So this is a great resource to really come into a new space with resident support at an early stage, as opposed to taking many years to build up that trust. You can sort of, through collaboration, get that buy-in at a much earlier stage. And then third, the local housing authority, who is our policy stakeholder, who also administers federal dollars to the construction project. But most significantly, they may have influence on future developments. So if you're able to show the impact that this garden has on an existing project, it's more likely that the housing authority is going to help advocate for future housing projects to include in their operating budgets and in the designs ahead of construction more gardens. So it's great to have that conduit between federal, state, and local policy, funding, and influence on housing projects. And so having all three represented in addition to your housing community residents is absolutely important to engage on ahead of beginning to plan your garden. So how can affordable housing support local food systems? What I've done is I've identified three models to think about. There could easily be others, but these are ones that I find are just easy to understand for the sake of this presentation. So first is what we did in Branch, which was incorporating gardens into existing affordable housing communities. Then there is the prospect of new housing construction, integrating the agriculture into the design so it's more accessible and there's built-in funding for it. And third is a little bit outside of the box. It's taking new affordable housing and incorporating set-asides for urban farmers. So setting some housing units aside that are specifically for farmers and people that are committed to gardening, so they can focus on producing and not worry so much about keeping a roof over their head. And so we'll start with the first, and the incorporation of phased in gardening in existing open space involves, workforce training partners that you can bring on who can help really leverage this space in a thoughtful way. You can collaborate with existing farms and have them on site as well. You can also make this space also a hub for other partners to come in with farm trucks and farmers markets and have cooking and other components. Oftentimes, these communities have a kitchen and a meeting space that would go well with a garden. So you can really take social and dietary programs to the next level by harvesting and preparing meals with that produce on site, and really just being a one-stop resource for all things edible that is promoting a great diet. And an example I pulled is a recent initiative in Jersey City where the Department of Health and Human Services brought Aero Farms, which is a large hydroponic for-profit entity, onto the grounds of an affordable housing community to figure out a way to produce, first year will be 19,000 pounds of free greens to eligible residents. And that production and process would also be an educational component to residents and their families. So they could be exposed to the food production side of things, understand the business, perhaps become employees of Aero Farms while at the same time producing food that is right there in the community, and turning that affordable housing community into a distribution hub and an education resource. So leveraging that open space that again has site control, that's not going to turn into a private gentrified luxury housing. It's going to stay food production, and making that into a real meaningful partnership with the housing, so that those in need of food access and income can learn that process with an existing proven business. The second model I mentioned was the new construction integration. And this I often think about, it's very similar to an agri-hood, which is market rate housing. Often it's middle to upper middle income suburban developments that are brand new construction built around an urban farm. So in this sense, the urban farm is suburban, but you're still taking intensive development of mixed use housing, higher densities around so you're turning rural into like this pseudo urban space. But the idea is that instead of a grocery store, you have a farm to table resource. In this case, we're making something like that is for folks that are below 50% area median income, oftentimes as low as 20%, and replicating that model with low income housing tax credits, which we call LIHTC. And this is the leading funding source for affordable housing. And so to apply, you have to have certain amenities for the community and developing to be incorporated into construction. They give annual operating budgets. And so to already account for farming would really set this project ahead, as it would then be able to not have to look for philanthropic support, but could also continue to have that guaranteed dollars to maintain those gardens moving forward. And this will increase the likelihood of being awarded, because LIHTC funding, and I'll mention this again later, is competitive. And so the more health promoting amenities a new community can offer, the more likely it will receive that funding. And so an example I'm pulling up is in Pittsburgh. They are transforming 107 acres of land into a new low-income, affordable housing community that is an agri-hood with 23 acres dedicated to farming. And already the ownership has been transferred to the city and its redevelopment authority, which is now subdividing the land so that what is for farming will stay farming, and what is for housing will stay housing. Again, site control. And it'll be all integrated in a way that residents will be able to be involved in local food production, and their family will be accessing and exposed to all things related to fresh produce without having to leave their property, which is a really exciting new direction that affordable housing is starting to head. So I look forward to seeing what comes out of the Pittsburgh project in the future as construction begins. I think a lot will be learned from this example. And third, new affordable housing set-asides is nothing new. This is something that a lot of affordable housing developers are already doing. They're setting aside, 20%, 10% of housing for not just income eligible, but veterans, transitional, supportive housing. There's examples of this being done for certified artists. So, a lot of people argue horticulture is a craft and an art, and I wouldn't say they're wrong. It really is an art. And so providing affordable housing and land for growers can be a great incentive to also attract new folks to food entrepreneurship, because now they can really hone in on their skills and not have to worry about housing. And as I mentioned with artists, you would need an application process and some sort of transparent and fair process of accepting individuals and certifying them as a grower, so that people know what it takes to be eligible for those units and to be recognized as a grower. So it wouldn't be something where the first 10 applicants say they're a farmer and they get the housing. There would need to be a process in place that is locally sanctioned by government to make it very clear what it takes to get that certification to acquire that housing, and have to have a certain amount of growing experience that can be provided as a pipeline for those future tenants. An example I'm pulling is artist housing in West Philadelphia. There's other examples in Rahway, New Jersey, and other parts of the state. But in this case, you had qualified artists demonstrating that they're working artists through professional references, an application, writing statements, and being reviewed by a board and getting that certification. They were able to get a certain number of units in Pelton Village that are mixed with non-artists, but the ratio does vary depending on the project. This is a great way of preventing the loss of creativity and talent that makes a neighborhood very unique and distinct. It allows communities to hold on to those assets without losing into the rising costs of housing. So affordable housing policies and funding. This is where we start to think about what's possible legally and what are some ways we can think about funding these projects. So already HUD, the Housing and Urban Development at the federal level, recognizes the importance of stipends for urban farming equipment and training for the educators, providing hands-on work-like experience and offering free opportunities for technical training. They recognize that urban agriculture and farming community gardens in general can enhance existing open spaces with garden infrastructure. This can even be passive. This could be edible landscapes and producing fruits in herb gardens, and emphasizing urban gardening through increasing activated green space. So there might be a lot of underutilized land that's situated within that community that HUD welcomes, getting people outdoors and walking, exploring through gardening. So we're very lucky that the federal government is already understanding the impacts and importance of urban agriculture. Just some of the key terms, again, tax credits is an incentive that allows the taxpayers to subtract the amount of credit that they have accrued from a total that they would owe the state in taxes. And this credit is kind of traded around so that one person is spending an X number of dollars of tax credit. That means over the next 10 years, that total investment broken down by 10 is amount of money they don't have to pay the government for the next 10 years. So it's the government's way of lending money or financing construction to the private sector. And so again, housing urban development is what we're talking about when we refer to HUD. And this is the US government agency that's responsible for all things housing related. And they fund the state housing programs. They fund local housing authorities, which are the agencies that manage these programs on a municipal level. They give the funding for the states to manage the low-income housing tax credit. That's the specific tax credit program that private entities will use to build and manage affordable housing. We call it LIHTC, and the rules for applying and getting awarded the LIHTC credit to use for construction, those rules are set by every state in their own qualified allocation plan. And that plan is something that is really important because the more things you can check off in your proposal, the more likely you will get that money. The IRS, in terms of housing set aside for farmers, is justifiable. Where there is a restriction is if we're only holding those units for farmers from a specific community or group. This project cannot be workforce housing. So if Aero Farms wanted to build affordable housing for their employees only, that would not be permitted. But anyone who you have through an open, transparent process from any community, from any group, should be allowed to be certified fairly and have access to those units. So that's where the IRS kind of steps in. As it relates to earning income, this is a concern we've heard before. If residents are earning more money through producing food in their community, will their rent increase? And there are some protections for this called the Earned Income Disregard, EID. And so this is something that kind of protects rent increases for higher income. And so a person can receive a 48-month disallowance. But it's important to note that this is with a substantial increase in income. I mean, it does vary enough that I can't give you an exact number, but historically from gardening, that income is more supplemental and does not really put someone into this position. But should they fall into a space where rent could be increased, this program will protect them. It could be because they've been unemployed for more than 12 months. It could be because the increase of income came from job training programs, which is basically what we propose. Or it could be from state program. So if the state got involved in this access in nutritional side, an individual could be protected for those 48 months. So there is this earned income allowance process that can protect renters in affordable housing. And again, I see the middle, where this is job training that would qualify these projects should someone make such a great windfall that housing is a concern. Talking about funding, we've talked about LIHTC, and this is $9 billion a year of tax expenditures for constructing housing, and that housing must stay affordable for at least 30 years. These are federal facts here. And the tax, actually, I apologize, this is New Jersey. This comes straight from the State Department of Community Affairs. And again, these credits can be sold to investors like banks, and investors can claim those tax deductions, as I said, based on the depreciation and losses on the projects. So even though it's a federal program, this is what New Jersey uses to build a lot of its affordable housing. So getting in on the ground floor of the future LIHTC applications is a great strategy. But just in general, understanding this process is important as you work with affordable housing developers and authorities to talk about gardens. There is another source of funding that is common that we can use for gardens, and that is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This allows municipalities financial assistance in affordable housing construction in addition to tax credits. This also comes from DCA, New Jersey Department of Community Affairs, and often they provide trust fund dollars in three categories. The first is municipal settlement. That has to deal with obligations that communities have to provide a certain amount of affordable housing. So that can be a burden for some communities. And so the trust fund allows them some additional resources to meet those obligations. DCA has another list of exciting and innovative and great programs that can help stabilize and improve the quality of life in communities. And it involves different partnerships, getting certified. There's the Neighborhood Preservation Program, there's Main Street, there's a whole host of programs that if a municipality is part of through DCA, they too can access trust fund dollars to meet the housing objectives within that partnership in that program. The third, and I think is the most interesting, is if there is an innovation happening. So if your argument is that you're reforming and making affordable housing a health promoting resource that's saving lives and healthcare dollars through gardening, and you're having set asides to make it affordable and transformative for growers to really get a footing into the food economy, I would argue that these trust funds could be accessed for the innovation side of things. But not to stay so zeroed in on these federal and state funding sources, but to keep in mind that there are collaborative partnerships you can make right now that can also bring resources to the table for urban agriculture and community gardens. Some of the great tools we've done with the Roots to Prevention is working with healthcare providers. they understood early on that gardening is keeping people healthier and increasing the likelihood that they'll maintain a healthy diet. The chronic use of emergency food services is something that food pantries have been concerned about, and food banks as well. And some are going to extremes to even build housing to alleviate some of the determinants, the social determinants of families needing emergency food services. Chronic use can lead to all sorts of malnutrition and dietary challenges, because our emergency food system was not designed to be a readily utilized source for fresh produce and healthy foods. Oftentimes they're shelf stable. They're to get people through in dire need. And so we ask a lot of our emergency food services. And so they too can have programmatic dollars to kind of help address some of these inequities. I've been in talks with groups that are also open to the idea of purchasing fresh produce grown by residents in food insecure communities, so that they could provide them in their food banks. And so there is a purchasing component, just as there would be from the healthcare side. And so understanding all of that, we have worked obviously with Rowan University and the Community Planning and Visualization Lab to create a toolkit, something that would make it a little bit easier for everyone to think through all the steps leading up to the planning and implementation of affordable housing and integrating those community gardens. And so over the last 6 months, Rowan University's Community Planning and Visualization Lab designed this toolkit in collaboration with lots of partners in Camden, to make sure that we're providing extensive research on how this can be replicated. It doesn't have every single answer, but it allows you to know exactly how to present the need and steward a plan that engages the residents in a housing community, the developer, the social service provider, and the housing authority in a very productive way on how to develop a useful and impactful garden within an affordable housing community that is actually wanted and utilized by the residents. And so we broke down the toolkit into the preparation phase, the planning phase, and the implementation phase. And so preparation is to really think about making sure you have your project team, you have a committee of residents, you've gathered their input on exactly what they would like to see in their garden. Is this a meeting space? Is this for food? What kind of design scenarios make the most sense for them? And then really to figure out what partners are still missing. Like, there's a lot to be addressed in terms of the maintenance and do you want to have cooking and nutrition, and are there groups that can come in and fill those spaces, and can healthcare come in and provide additional food resources and knowledge, and lots to explore. So this is the phase where you really try to figure out all of your needs and incorporate that into a plan that involves the maintenance, the budget, the organizational structure, where do the residents and the building maintenance and the managers all fit into this? Do you need grants from the philanthropic side? And then who's going to do the construction and what makes them qualified to do so? Or are you doing a bid process? And then the final phase, the implementation, is not just getting the land tested and readied and the infrastructure in place. It's not just getting the construction, but it's really building the excitement. It's having partners, local politicians, and the media there for an unveiling that's led and featuring the residents and the participants that have been through this whole process front and center, getting recognized for their commitment and making sure that they are receiving compensation of some form or fashion. And so this really does a great job of taking you through the 13 key steps to how do we get a Branch Village garden off the ground, and how can this be done in other places? So I hope that you guys have gotten some ideas from this information, and I welcome you to send questions to myself or through the university. I'll make sure that my contact information is available along with this presentation. And I thank you so much for your time and interest on this topic. And I hope you find this very informative. And yeah, so thank you guys so much.